Hello, everybody. It's Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies here. And today I wanted to record an extra to my weekly video for people who are more interested in the physical nature of the universe we live in. Now, that's not something that may strike you as a natural interest of mine, but actually, I was a scientist before I was a therapist. And as a kid, I was really interested in physics. Wow, imagine that. Science really inspired me. I wanted to become a world leading scientist, of course, like we all do. And of course, I never quite made it. Problem being that science as it is practiced doesn't match the noble aims of how it is taught in school. You know, the idea that we could improve our world through understanding the way it works is a noble idea. The way science works, when you finally graduate and you get into a role or a position within the scientific establishment, is actually not about questioning things. It's about maintaining the status quo and making sure you get your work published and that your department gets the grants that it needs in order to pay the staff that support the academic environment. And that is really stifling to creativity. And it's something that I think is the main reason why a lot of people drop out, and particularly as women. It's not an arena we feel comfortable in. It's very cutthroat and very competitive, and you publish or die, basically. Now, in a recent video, I alluded to somebody who's managed to create a whole organization outside of the mainstream, and his name is Nassim Haramein. And he's an extraordinary person. He's, I think, in his 50s now. He might be even slightly older. But he came through school, realized he didn't want to go to university. And so he kind of lived in a van for about 10 years so that he could be in the natural world, observe the natural world. And at the same time, he could observe and work through and research his ideas on the nature of reality. And I was at a conference that was organized by the International Space Federation, which is his organization of multiple scientists, actually based, I think it's in Switzerland and France now. France is the newest venue. And he was doing a tour, the Nature of Reality tour, talking about his ideas and presenting to a largely unscientific audience, people who are interested, but they're not trained in physics. He was presenting some really important ideas on quantum mechanics and special relativity, which are the two main theories in physics that have been around for 100 years, but they've never, ever been unified into one overarching equation or understanding. And he proposed that he's now solved that problem. And he took us through why the problem exists. And I'm going to go through that with you in a moment. I'm going to go into quite a lot more detail than I did on my original video, because my original video is for my general audience. This is self-selecting. I hope you are people who are a bit more interested in the nuts and bolts of this. But I should say that the reason this is important is not just, it's not an esoteric subject about, quantum physics. It's actually about how we belong and how we fit in the universe that we inhabit. And so I think it's the biggest question of all. Why are we here? What is it that we're here to do? How is it that human beings have consciousness? All those questions are really important. And I think understanding the underlying patterns of the universe is one step towards understanding why we fit within that. And so the first thing to understand is that the nature of the universe is vibratory. It's oscillatory. It moves. There is everything that exists in the universe is in motion, from the protons in our cells, which are moving from the organelles in our cells, from us, indeed, we move within our environment. The earth upon which we live is rotating and moving around the sun, and our solar system is moving around our universe. And so everything is in motion, okay? But that doesn't often occur to us because we we have senses which kind of give us the impression that we're static, and we're very limited by what we understand our universe to be because of those senses, because they filter information, and our brain basically creates the reality that we see, and we think that this is all there is. And because we can't see the vibratory nature of the universe, we perhaps regard it as irrelevant, unimportant, but it isn't. And here's the reason. So if everything is in motion, it has a field, it has charge and a spin. And anything that is moving, therefore, can create a fluctuation in the field. And that is what provides the energy for everything that is created. So matter arises out of energy, not the other way around. So the patterns that these spinning objects form, and not just the macro objects, but the tiny objects. If you imagine the protons in our atoms, and then beneath that, what makes up the proton is tiny, tiny units of Planck units, they're called, named after Max Planck, which are the smallest unit that we can possibly understand in our current universe. It's the smallest thing. And it's a vibratory oscillating field of little Planck units, sometimes also called PSUs, although Nassim was saying that he's going to be renaming those to voxels, I think, which is a great name, because they are the sort of basic building blocks of this vibratory field that we're embedded in. It's a field of energy and information. And what you need to understand is that this can feed forward and it can feed back, okay? And actually it is possible to interact with this field. That's the basis of the law of attraction and all that sort of stuff that many people understand, that you create your own reality. But of course, that's been watered down and somewhat simplified and perhaps made less relevant, because it simply makes it sound like you only have to think of having money and suddenly you have money, which is not really the case. But understanding that this is a feedback system, that it learns about itself, like all complex systems, means that we do have a degree of power, you could say, or at the very least responsibility about what we put out into the field. And so, you know, if we're thinking highly negative thoughts all the time, it's no surprise that our reality is highly negative, because that's the system we are creating around us. Okay, so getting back to the physics of this, it was thought, and for 100 years or more, this has been the case, that there were two different sets of laws for the large and the very small. Einstein, working alongside many other physicists, was credited with creating the large-scale theory, the theory of special relativity, which talks about energy being related to mass and the speed of light. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that, but his famous equation E equals mc squared sort of summarizes it. But what Nassim was saying was that actually mass has never been fully defined, and c, which is the speed of light, has never been exactly fixed, if you like. It does seem to vary, which is very strange, within very tiny parameters, but it does vary. So that's the kind of law that we use to explain the cosmological scale, what happens with planets and solar systems and so on, black holes. But what about the very, very tiny things and quantum theory? Now, this was also called quantum mechanics, has come up with some very, very strange ideas of superposition, that something can be in two places at the same time, and that things are not material matter. They're kind of bursting between being a particle or a wave, and they kind of spontaneously change depending on being observed. This is the Copenhagen interpretation of the double split experiment. Now, this has always troubled me. Indeed, I included it in my book, Life Illuminated, and I used the standard Copenhagen interpretation because that's what all the textbooks tell you. That's how you're taught physics at school or university, is that when you fire a particle, it can be a photon, an electron, doesn't really matter, through a plate that has a slit in it, quite as expected, on the recording plate behind, you get a sort of scattering of a slit of the different, where the particles have hit. If you have two splits in the screen, you would expect two bands behind each slit, but that's not what you see. What you see is an interference pattern suggesting that the particles have suddenly become waves. And thirdly, if you then put a measuring device behind the split screen, you actually find that the interference pattern disappears and you get the particles again. And the standard Copenhagen interpretation has always been that, that matter can interchange between being a particle or a wave, and it can do so because it's being observed. And it sort of gave us the power of the credit, if you like, of immediately, instantaneously switching matter into something that we can interpret as solid. And so it kind of is a human-centric view, actually. And it was, I didn't know this, but it was largely disagreed with by Daniel Bohm, and a couple of other people who said, no, that interpretation is entirely wrong. There has to be something else that's causing the wave pattern when there are two slits. And I think what Nassim has contributed to this is a sort of broader view, and he's pulled back to say, well, what's missing is what's in the nothing, the field, the vacuum, that we have always, for 100 years or more, believed to be completely void and empty. And indeed, you know, matter is 99.9999% space, all right? But that doesn't mean the space itself is completely empty. It contains energy. It contains vibratory energy, what's sometimes referred to as the 0 point field. And I found the reason for that was because when you measure temperatures in Kelvin, 0 Kelvin is where everything is supposed to stop. But what Nassim has found is that there's still a residual energy, and he's put that term back into the equation. And by doing that, he's managed to unify both the special relativity equation and the quantum mechanical equation as developed by Max Planck. And he took us through this in great detail, looking at the different functions. So I'd like to go through that a little bit. So bearing in mind then that our universe that we exist in as human beings, and all the animals and all the plants and everything that we see as living exists in, is a fluctuating field that has intense energy even at 0 degrees Kelvin, all right, does beg the question, how is it that we're not using that energy when nature uses it all the time? And that seems to be a political answer that fossil fuels have just taken over. We're using sunlight energy that was stored thousands, millions of years ago to release energy now, but because we've denied the existence of any energy in the ether or the field, we've not been exploring that. And indeed, anybody who does explore that is regarded as a quack and suppressed. So Nassim is regarded as a quack by a lot of people. You can look that up on the web. You'll find out that many people think he's a pseudoscientist, but you'll find that with anybody who thinks outside the box. Rupert Sheldrake has the same kind of attribute, even though I think his morphogenic field theory is really profound, actually. You will understand that this is a political environment where ideas that do not conform to the mainstream are going to be ridiculed and quashed because they threaten vested interests, which are largely profit-driven. And it's not just, you know, the extractive industries, oil and gas and so on. It's actually the research departments of major universities who are tied into this military-industrial complex. And it may not seem that when you're working in them, you think you're doing something noble and wonderful, but you get to see over time that your efforts are slowly guided towards publishing things that fit the mainstream narrative. And that's one of the reasons Nassim decided not to bow out. It's certainly not through lack of intelligence, because he's one of the brightest people I've ever met. He has such a command of both mathematics and physics and kind of, I guess, more esoteric knowledge as well, East and Western philosophy. It's quite extraordinary. So we're his major contribution, I think, apart from the unification, is the idea that the field is holographic, that everything is contained, everything of the whole is contained in every part. And he's proved this with the proton, which is the basic building block of matter. The proton is the most stable material form that we know of. As of yet, we've never seen a proton decay because the life of a proton exceeds that of our universe. So it's a very stable particle. And it is the basis of everything because it stores within it the holographic information on its surface of everything else that exists in the universe, all the mass of the entire universe. And he believes that the proton is actually a black hole itself. It's a mini black hole. And we know from black holes that the information is stored on the surface, what's called the event horizon. And this is the subject of many sci-fi movies. But actually, many things that we take for granted, like the sun, for instance, he believes has a black hole at its center, and he believes he's proved that and measured it. But the extraordinary information, I think, is that the basic building blocks of matter are also black holes and store information and are connected to every other particle in the universe by a series of little wormholes which connect from the surface of one to the surface of everything else. So look, this is really extraordinary because it means everything is connected to everything else. And that's what Eastern philosophy has told us for thousands of years. But now we have a sort of scientific, rigorous proof of that, which, I mean, I can't honestly recommend that you read one of his papers unless you have a mathematical bent or you may be trained in mathematics or physics. But the basic ideas are very, very sound. We are in a soup, or he likes to call it the smoothie of limitless energy vibrating all around us. A holographic field where all the information is contained at every point. All right. And that's what a hologram is. You know, you're probably familiar with a hologram that's created on a plate, which shows things in 3D because there's been an interference pattern created on the plate, which feeds back the information in a 2D representation. So it looks like it's in 3D. That's the basic understanding of a hologram. But holographic actually means repeating at all scales, really, as fractal. So if we have everything is recorded on the surface of every tiny proton in the universe, then we have information encoded there that I guess forms a pattern of self-learning, self-replication. And that's what the basis, I guess, of the feedback system. You have to have a feedback system for anything to evolve or grow or change. That's the basic understanding. We have to not only state these things, we have to be able to prove them. And I think the strength of his work is that he's able to show the rigorous analytical equations for this process. And we understand that why this has been omitted is largely because physics looks at isolated systems. And there is no such thing in nature as an isolated system. It's a man-made concept. So that's the first issue I think he was keen to point out. You know, the way water evaporates, it rains, collects, you know, and is recycled into rain, which then collects again, is an example of a recycling system. But everywhere you look in nature, you know, waste products from the decay of one, you know, the forest floor, for instance, will be taken in by fungi and recycled into the roots of plants, which then photosynthesize and take in the material and regrow. So there really isn't such a thing in nature, and we're part of that, you know. So even when we die, we're recycled. All our atoms are recycled. So the idea that you could create an isolated system and then define it doesn't really make sense in the world in which we live. So how then can we talk about the relationships between things? Because they're really key. The universe is a universe of relationships. Defined by the geometrical or mathematical relationships. maths, I guess, defines it's the human way of describing the geometry, all right, because it's a notation like music. Maths is just a notation, but the geometry that underlines it is intrinsic, I believe, to the way the universe works. And some of us enjoy drawing these things, like the tree of life and the seed of life. These are geometrical constructions which kind of resonate with us because they are how the world works. And there's no such thing as an isolated system, not in nature. But much of theoretical physics has been based on this. And so it's no wonder, really, that no unification has happened so far in 110, 20 years, because people have the wrong understanding of what it is we exist in. And he was also explaining that oscillation is misunderstood as well, and it's often taught as a sort of a weight on a string in a kind of 2D representation, but in fact the oscillation is more of a spiral. It's in 3Ds, and so it's having the right visual metaphors in some ways to ask the right questions. Because if you are thinking the world is just like a weight on a string, you're not going to ask about the movement in 3 dimensions because you're not going to conceive of it. And so he thinks the whole system of teaching physics is completely wrong. And I have observed that myself. You know, I enjoyed physics at school, but I was always aware that it didn't feel complete to me. And so I didn't go on to study at a university, but I always wanted to know more. And this is why I think his ideas are so good, is because they're so inspiring to the younger generation as well, who want to know the wonder of the world. We need to connect with that a lot more. So, as I've said, one proton is connected to all the other protons in the entire universe. Okay. And this is a fractal system. So fractal means repeating at all scales. It turns out we are in the middle of this vast scale, from the cosmological to the quantum. One begs to ask the question, is that just coincidence that we're right in the middle? Or maybe not. Maybe it's designed that way. Maybe intelligence has arisen right in the middle because it can take information from below and above. And so that's not necessarily saying there's a creator. I'm steering clear of religion on this one, but just to say there's intelligence in the system, all right, that I definitely think we could all agree on. So it's the energy that creates matter, not the other way around. That's another really important point. And therefore, how energy is used and how matter is created is an interactive system. And therefore, a human being, as an example of matter in a living form, is a miracle, a living miracle, because we're so complex. And so many reactions and information transfer is going on per second in just one person. You multiply that up by the number of people on our planet. We really do have a lot more collective power than we believe ourselves to have. This universe is self-learning. It's evolving through its interaction with matter, through us and other living things that are feeding back information into the system. So transforming yourself is not a selfish act, all right? When you decide to change your worldview and the way you're living, you're not only transforming your own experience of reality, but you're transforming the universe itself. You're transforming other people's experience. That's why I think human evolution has gone in sort of waves and spurts rather than been a general gradation. There have been moments in our history where collectively people start to think the same way, and that is what propels a new way of being, perhaps a new evolution of democracy or a new civilization. There is so much evidence that we've had really extraordinary periods of knowledge in our history. If we look at the pyramids, for instance, it's hard to believe they were built with, levers and pulleys. And I know there are various theories that it could be hydraulics, and some people believe it's aliens who came down to help us build them. But the more likely explanation is that perhaps ancient cultures had a more connected understanding of the world in which they lived. And maybe, just maybe, it hasn't been a linear evolution and we haven't got more and more knowledge, but there have been periods in our evolution where we perhaps had some kind of knowledge that we have lost with the collapse of that civilization. It may be to do with sound energy. There are some theories that if you harness the sun or the harmonics of the earth, that things can be made to lift through sound energy. We simply don't know. But I think the question is, can we assume that who we are now is the most advanced we've ever been? If that's the case, then we're in dire trouble, because we are gradually destroying our Earth at this point in time. So I think this understanding that we're all connected, that we have more power than we realize, actually does give us responsibility towards pushing our evolution in a more responsible, more connected way. And I certainly would like to see more of this information given to children and, generally for people to understand, because it allows people to make changes in their lives that really impact other people in a powerful and positive way. Now, one of the biggest questions that Nassim has been looking at is the nature of gravity, because he was saying that gravity has never been fully explained. Okay, we know it's an attractive force. We know it acts to keep, planets in motion around each other. Yes, we know all of that, but what is the substance? What is the basis of gravity? He believes he's proved that it's the spin of all these quantized voxels in the ether or the field acting together at the quantum level. And he's actually made that a rigorous equation, which I refer you to his paper because I'm not going to be able to repeat it here. And I think, in a way, if it proves that his theories are correct, which they seem to be, because mathematically they work out, they actually have predicted the charge radius of a proton very accurately, then he has done what Einstein couldn't do in his lifetime and kind of link these two big theories of the way the world works. He explains the notion of space-time, which he includes the term space memory, because he thinks it's a space memory network, and memory is part of this feedback system, the feedback of information, so it's self-learning. He explains it as pulling the plug if you're in the bath and watching the water go round and down the plug hole. He was saying if you look at the water surface behind that area, it appears smooth and undisturbed, but obviously nearer this movement, this vortex, it has a very powerful propelling force, and he believes that's what's happening in gravity at the minute quantum level as well. It's the collective organization of all these spinning Planck units, and within everything, so not just planets, but protons in atoms. So he does propose that this theory also eliminates the need for the forces that keep protons together in the nucleus of the cell, sometimes called the strong force or the weak force, which has been invented by man to explain why protons stick together when they should repel. And so it's really a factor that's been calculated to explain what's going on, even though there's no way of actually proving that it exists. And so his theory kind of does away with this because it replaces it with these quantized gravity forces that exist in the very tiny pixels or voxels of the universe. And so I think it's a really, really important understanding. And for me, the real revelation came towards the end when he started to talk about how that impacts with our biology. That your choices matter, because you are part of this feedback and feed forward system. Um, Integrating head and heart, for instance, which are both vibratory systems at the macro level, and the power of our imagination, which interacts on a quantum level with the universe as well, to change things, to make possible a world where we live in harmony with our world rather than seeking to dominate and destroy it. He talked a little bit about consciousness, and that is included in a little bit more in the in-depth conversation with Aubrey Marcus, which I will include in the show notes below. But consciousness is a natural emergent process from this feedback system with the universe in which we live. It's not necessarily, therefore, created in the brain, but it is a natural response to a self-learning environment. At least that was my understanding. I may have got that wrong. He talked about focusing on the good, on hope and renewal. And I think that's so important in the times in which we're living, where bad news is everywhere, from, government collapse to the collapse of the climate. We're living in a hopeless time and that's really, really affecting the mental states of many of us. It's very hard to find hope and renewal in this time in which we live. He wants to combine old wisdom and new ideas, so the science meeting the spiritual, if you like. He is by far one of the most innovative thinkers I've ever come across, and I watch a lot of these videos with some very, very intelligent people. What I love about him is he's an outsider, he's a maverick, he's a multidisciplinarian, so he brings in lots of other people to try and engage. I mean, some people regard him as a quack, unfortunately, because he's outside the mainstream, and because they erroneously say that his articles are not peer-reviewed. Well, he's going through peer review at the moment, and it's taking a long time because, as he says, there's very few people that can combine in one person all the understanding that his papers need, because he has such a broad range of understanding. So it really it is about understanding that we have this potential as humans to drive forward a world in which we are in harmony and creating a better world for all of us to live in. And I think even without the scientific basis, but I find that very, very important that he has the scientific rigor, but even without that, his ideas are extraordinary. I'm looking forward greatly to his new work, which is going to be more on the bio field and how biology actually resonates at various scales with this kind of vibratory Planck unit. So it's not live at the moment. I anticipate it'll come out sometime next year. For the moment, that's my summary. Nassim Haramein, I would encourage you all to investigate this man's ideas. I find him just extraordinary. Thank you so much for listening, and take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye for now.